abyss beckons with a chilling call. Come closer, listen to the shadows draw. So subscribe and like, and don't be afraid to dive into the darkness where the shadows are laid. Tales from the shadows will spook your world. Join us on this journey, let your fears unfurl. Stay tuned, stay weird, and watch out for what lurks in the shadows.
Welcome, friends, to the dark and the deep, where whispers linger and shadows creep. Tales from the shadows, where legends arise, with ghostly stories and myths that mesmerize. We continue our tale, picking up right where we left off. The shadowy doubles advanced, each one reflecting the worst aspects of Denny, Celine, and Eric. Denny could feel the chill radiating from his doppelganger, a force made of his doubts and fears. Celine's shadow moved with lethal precision, embodying her coldest, most detached self. Eric's double was hulking and savage, every movement brimming with raw, unrestrained violence. Denny's grip on Gungnir tightened, his pulse thundering in his ears. "We have to fight smart," he called out to his friends. "These aren't just shadows, our weaknesses turned against us." Celine's eyes flicked to her shadow self, analyzing its stance. "If there are weaknesses," she murmured, "maybe we know their strengths too." Eric, however, was breathing heavily, his eyes wide and panicked as he backed away from his hulking doppelganger. I don't think I can do this," he stammered, his voice breaking. Before Denny could respond, the shadow Eric lunged, swinging a massive shadowy axe. "Eric, focus!" Denny shouted, but his own shadow attacked, driving him backward. Shadow Denny's movements were eerily familiar, wielding a dark replica of Gungnir. "You'll never be good enough, you know. Always struggling, always doubting. You're just a boy pretending to be a god." Meanwhile, Celine and her doppelganger circled each other, arrows flying in a deadly dance. "You hide behind your calm facade," it hissed, "but inside, you're terrified of losing control." Celine's jaw tightened, and she released an arrow with a shout of defiance. Eric was struggling the most. His shadow was relentless, its attacks brutal and overwhelming. "You're weak," the shadow growled, its voice heavy with scorn. "A burden to your friends." Tears pricked at Eric's eyes, and he sank to his knees, paralyzed by the truth of the words. Denny saw Eric faltering, and panic gripped him. They couldn't win like this. Sometimes, the only way to defeat the darkness is to confront and accept it. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm despite the fear gnawing at him. "I do doubt myself." His shadow hesitated, the smirk faltering. Denny seized the moment, channeling his energy into Gungnir. Denny turned to Celine, who had heard his words. Her eyes widened in realization. "I'm afraid of losing control," she admitted, her voice evident. "But fear doesn't define me." Only Eric remained on his knees, his shield lying useless at his side. "Eric," Denny shouted, "you're stronger than this. We believe in you." Eric's head snapped up, tears streaming down his face. He saw his friends fighting for him. Gritting his teeth, Eric grabbed his shield and stood, raising it just in time to block the shadow's attack. "I'm afraid," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "But that doesn't make me weak." The shadow empire faltered, its form flickering. With a roar of determination, Eric bashed the shadow with his shield. Silence fell over the battlefield. The skeletal wolves reappeared, watching with glowing eyes. "You have faced your shadows and prevailed. The gate is yours to enter." Denny, Celine, and Eric stood together, bruised and exhausted but stronger for what they had endured. Denny looked at his friends, a sense of pride and unity filling his chest. The landscape beyond the gate was both haunting and mesmerizing. Shadows danced across the ground in unnatural patterns, and the sky above swirled with dark, sluggish clouds that seemed to blot out any notion of hope. Denny, Celine, and Eric stepped cautiously onto a path made of cracked obsidian, the air thick with an unsettling, oppressive energy. They were in the heart of Helheim now, and each step felt like it could awaken something ancient and dangerous. As they approached what appeared to be the court of Hel herself, the architecture grew more ominous and surreal. Bone pillars twisted into impossible shapes, and vines of black ice curled around statues of the fallen souls who had wandered here over the millennia. Ghostly whispers drifted through the mist, fragments of forgotten sorrows. Denny kept Gungnir at his side, his senses on high alert. He could feel the spear's magic buzzing with nervous energy, as if even the mighty weapon was unsettled by this place. Celine kept her bow ready, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement, while Eric followed closely, clutching his shield and muttering prayers to the old gods under his breath. Finally, they came upon a grand dais carved from what looked like dark marble, but pulsing with an inner glow of greenish light. Atop it sat Hel, the underworld ruler, on a throne made of twisted iron and frozen souls. Her appearance was striking. Half of her body appeared beautiful and noble, with pale, unblemished skin and sharp, calculating eyes, while the other half was decayed and skeletal, as if death itself had laid claim to it. Her mismatched gaze fell upon the trio, and she smiled, a chilling expression promising amusement and danger. "Visitors," Hel drawled, her voice echoing around the court like a song sung by ghosts. "How rare it is to be graced by the living." She leaned forward, her skeletal hand tapping rhythmically against the arm of her throne. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this intrusion?" Denny swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze like a physical force. He stepped forward, trying to mask his fear. "We come to ask for your aid, Lady Hel," he said, his voice steady. "A darkness threatens the 9 realms, a power that even your domain cannot escape." He tilted her head, amusement flickering across her features. "A darkness, you say? My realm is already one of shadows and death. Why should I concern myself with a mere mortal's warnings?" Denny's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. "Because this isn't just any threat. It comes from Loki, the trickster himself, and seeks to unbalance the very fabric of the realms." He hesitated, then added, "And if Helheim falls, there will be no refuge left for the dead or the living." Hel's eyes darkened at the mention of Loki's name, and for a moment, the oppressive energy around them seemed to thrum with tension. She leaned back, her decayed side shifting in a way that sent shivers down Denny's spine. "Loki," she repeated, her voice icy. "Always meddling, always scheming." Celine stepped forward, her voice calm but urgent. "We're not asking you to fight for us," she said. "We just need information. Anything you know about Loki's plan, anything that can help us stop him before it's too late." He was silent for a long moment, her mismatched gaze studying each of them. Finally, she let out a low, thoughtful hum. "Information you seek. And yet, information is never free." Her eyes glinted with dark glee. "What are you willing to give in exchange?" Denny's mouth went dry. He had known there would be a cost, but he hadn't expected to face it so soon. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady but wary. He smiled, and it was a terrible thing to behold. "A memory," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "One of your most precious memories given freely. In return, I will tell you what I know of Loki's schemes." Denny's stomach twisted. Memories were precious, pieces of who he was. To give one up, it was almost unthinkable. He glanced at Celine and Eric, who looked just as stricken. But he knew they didn't have a choice. If they wanted to save the 9 realms, they needed Hel's knowledge. Denny took a deep breath, trying to choose which memory he could bear to lose. His mind wandered to his childhood, to moments spent with his mother before he had known anything about gods and monsters. One memory, in particular, was a day at the beach, his mother laughing as they built sandcastles together, the sun warm on their skin. It was a memory he cherished, one of the few that hadn't been tainted by the chaos that had since taken over his life. Tears pricked at his eyes, but he forced himself to look up at Hel. "You have a deal," he said, his voice cracking. Hel's skeletal smile widened. "Very well, son of Odin." She lifted a hand, and a cold wind swirled around Denny, pulling at his soul. He felt the memory slipping away, as if drained from his heart. He could see his mother's face, hear her laughter, and then it was gone, a hollow ache left in its place. Denny stumbled, clutching at his chest, but he steadied himself. He seemed pleased, her voice ringing out like a bell of finality. "As promised, here is your answer. Loki seeks to unravel Yggdrasil, the world tree that connects all realms. He seeks to corrupt its roots, to send the 9 realms into chaos and darkness." Denny's heart lurched at the revelation. Yggdrasil was the very lifeblood of their world, the force that kept everything in balance. If Loki succeeded, he continued, her gaze never wavering, he has begun his work in the shadows, gathering forces from realms both forgotten and forbidden. If you wish to stop him, You must seek the roots of Yggdrasil, where his corruption has already taken hold. Denny's hands clenched into fists. They had a direction now, but the cost had been steep. He nodded, his jaw set. Thank you, Lady Hel. He waved a dismissive hand. You should leave before Helheim decides to keep you. Her voice grew softer, more amused. And do be careful. Loki is not one to be underestimated, especially by your likes. Denny, Celine, and Eric turned to leave, their minds reeling. They had the information they needed, but the journey ahead would be even more dangerous. As they stepped back through the mist, the weight of the memory Denny had lost felt heavier than ever, and somewhere in the shadows of Helheim, a faint, cold laugh echoed. Loki's plans had only just begun. The trio stumbled out of Helheim, their spirits bruised, and their minds heavy with the information they had gained. Denny took a shaky breath, his chest aching with the emptiness left by the memory Hel had taken from him. Are you all right? Celine asked softly, her brow creased with worry. Denny forced a nod, even though he felt anything but exemplary. I'll manage, he replied. We have bigger problems to worry about. Eric let out a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. So to clarify, we're going to the world tree's roots, where ancient magic flows, and probably a bunch of things want to eat us. Celine shot him a look. Pretty much, she said dryly, though the worry in her eyes mirrored his own. Denny gripped Gungnir, trying to channel his fear into determination. Then we'd better get moving, he said. Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian, awaited them at the entrance. His eyes, as always, seemed to see far beyond the present moment. So you've returned, Heimdall said, echoing a distant storm, and you bear the weight of Hel's price. Denny swallowed, a wave of bitterness washing over him at the reminder. We need to get to the roots of Yggdrasil, he said. Heimdall's gaze grew distant, as if he were looking through time itself. The roots of Yggdrasil are not easily reached, he said. Celine stepped forward. We understand the risks, she said. But if we don't do something, the entire world tree could be corrupted. Heimdall studied her, then turned to Eric, who clutched his shield with white knuckles. You carry great fear, young one, the Guardian observed. With a wave of his hand, Heimdall activated the Bifrost. The bridge roared to life, light cascading around them in dazzling, swirling colors. But this time, something felt wrong. As they hurtled through the swirling light, shadows slithered in the periphery, dark tendrils that seemed to reach out for them. Do you see that? Eric shouted over the roar of the magic. We're not alone. Celine drew her bow, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the shadows. Loki's corruption, she said, her voice tight. Before they could react, one of the shadowy tendrils lashed out, striking the bridge with a force that made the entire structure tremble. Hold on, he yelled, summoning the power of Gungnir. The spear pulsed with golden light, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Celine released an arrow infused with magic, bursting into flames as it struck one of the shadows, driving it back momentarily. Heimdall's voice echoed around them, urgent and commanding. Brace yourselves. I'm sending you through. The Bifrost shuddered one last time before they were thrown forward, the light collapsing in on itself. They tumbled out onto solid ground, the world spinning around them. Denny gasped for air, but the aftershocks of the Bifrost travel coursing through him. They had arrived at the base of Yggdrasil, but it differed from what Denny had expected. Celine stood, her face pale but resolute. We made it, she said, though her voice held a note of dread. Eric pulled himself up, clutching his shield. Great, he muttered. Now we must figure out how to fight a god's magic and save the world tree. Denny took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The roots of Yggdrasil were before them, ancient and sacred, but now tainted by Loki's influence. He looked at his friends, drawing strength from their presence. We stop this together, he said, his voice firm, no matter what it takes. The oppressive darkness of the corrupted roots made every breath feel heavy, and each step felt dread. The air around the roots of Yggdrasil pulsed with a vile energy, and the tendrils of Loki's corruption snaked along the ground like living things, whispering in languages older than the stars. Denny gripped Gungnir tighter, feeling the ancient spear hum with tension. It seemed to sense the presence of the corrupted magic, and a flicker of golden light pulsed along its length, as if the weapon was eager to cleanse the area. But this wasn't an ordinary enemy. It manifested Loki's scheming and would not go down quickly. Celine scanned their surroundings, her bow at the ready. "We need to find the source of the corruption," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Loki must have left something here, an anchor for his magic." Eric stepped forward, his shield raised protectively. "And once we find it, how do we destroy it?" he asked. "Loki's magic isn't exactly something you can punch away." Denny's mind raced, trying to piece together what they knew about Yggdrasil and its roots. The World Tree was a source of pure, ancient energy, and Loki's corruption had likely twisted that power to his advantage. They needed to sever whatever connection the trickster god had established here, but it would take more than brute force. As they pushed deeper into the corrupted forest, the whispers grew louder. The shadows seemed to come alive, twisting into monstrous forms that crept around the edges of their vision. Denny could feel the darkness pressing in, tugging at his mind and whispering doubts into his heart. "Look at them," the shadows seemed to say, their voices slithering through his thoughts. "They don't trust you. They think you'll fail." Denny clenched his jaw, shaking off the insidious thoughts. He couldn't afford to let the darkness win. He had to be stronger than his doubts. Celine suddenly raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. "Something's coming," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. The ground trembled, and from the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, a grotesque amalgamation of corrupted roots and dark magic. Its body was made of twisted wood and stone, pulsing with that sickly green energy, and its eyes burned with an unnatural light. It let out a guttural roar, reverberating through the forest and making the air vibrate. Eric took a step back, his eyes wide. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. The monstrous guardian lunged at them, its massive limbs tearing through the earth. Denny sprang into action, channeling the power of Gungnir. The spear lit up with a brilliant golden glow, and he thrust it forward, sending a bolt of energy toward the creature. The blast struck the guardian's chest, but the beast barely flinched. Instead, it seemed to grow angrier, its corrupted form twisting and writhing. "Great, it's resistant to magic," Eric groaned, raising his shield just in time to deflect a swing from one of the creature's massive limbs. The impact sent him stumbling back, but he stayed on his feet. Celine fired an arrow infused with magic, aiming for one of the creature's glowing eyes. The arrow struck true, and the guardian let out a roar of pain, but still refused to go down. "We're barely making a dent," she shouted. Denny's mind raced, trying to come up with a strategy. The guardian was too powerful to defeat with brute force alone. They needed to weaken it, to cut off the source of its strength. His eyes darted around, searching for anything to give them an advantage. And then he saw a cluster of corrupted roots near the creature's base. They were pulsing with that same green light and seemed connected to the guardian's body. A reckless and desperate idea formed in his mind, but it was their only chance. "Celine, Eric," he called, his voice strong and commanding. "Distract it! I'm going for the roots!" Celine's eyes widened in understanding, and she nodded. "Got it," she said, firing another volley of arrows to draw the creature's attention. Eric charged forward, using his shield to deflect and keep the guardian's attacks off balance. Denny took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He sprinted toward the cluster of corrupted roots, Gungnir blazing with golden light. As he neared the origins, he could feel the dark magic radiating from them, a foul energy that made his skin crawl. He knew he had to act quickly. With a burst of strength, Denny drove Gungnir into the heart of the corruption. The spear's magic clashed with Loki's dark power, and it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath for a moment. The roots shuddered, and a pulse of golden light exploded outward, cutting through the corruption. The guardian let out a final anguished roar as the light engulfed it. Its body crumbled, the corrupted energy dissipating like mist in the wind. The forest around them seemed to exhale, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly. Denny stumbled back, breathing hard. He had done it, at least for now, but he knew this was only a tiny victory. Loki's corruption still lingered, and the fight was far from over. Celine and Eric hurried to his side, relief and exhaustion written across their faces. "Nice work," Celine said, a faint smile breaking through her worry. Eric let out a shaky laugh. "Remind me never to underestimate you," he said, clapping Denny on the back. Denny managed a small smile, but his thoughts were already turning to the next step. The roots of Yggdrasil were still vulnerable, and Loki's plan was only beginning to unfold. They had won this battle, but the war for the 9 realms was just getting started. And somewhere, in the shadows that lingered at the edges of their victory, Denny could almost hear Loki's laughter. A chilling reminder that the trickster god was always one step ahead. Far away from the roots of Yggdrasil, a storm churned with shadows in the cold and endless expanse of Jotunheim. This was no ordinary storm, an extension of Loki's will, a seething mass of chaos and magic. Deep within this whirlwind, the trickster god stood at the edge of a jagged cliff, surveying the darkness he had unleashed. Loki's eyes glinted with mischief and malice, the light flickering like green flames. He was tall and imposing, his presence more unsettling than the fiercest storms. A smirk curled at his lips as he conjured an imaginary map of the 9 realms, tracing his fingers across the lines that marked Yggdrasil's roots. "They're more resilient than I anticipated," Loki murmured, his voice smooth but tinged with irritation. "That little band of misfits managed to disrupt my first attempt." He clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into a fist. The illusion wavered for a moment, then solidified again, glowing brighter. A pair of shimmering blue eyes emerged from the darkness, and a giant wolf padded forward, its fur as black as night, and its fangs glinting like shards of ice. Fenrir, Loki's son and a beast of pure destruction, sat at his father's side. The wolf's growl was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Patience, my son," Loki said, resting a hand on Fenrir's massive head. "There is still much to do. They are merely delaying the inevitable." With a wave of his hand, Loki conjured another illusion. This time, the image was of Denny Wyatt, standing tall with Gungnir in hand, golden light blazing around him. Loki's eyes narrowed as he studied Denny, his smirk deepening. "Odin's little half-blood," Loki sneered. "The son of a god and a mortal, so full of potential, yet so full of doubt." He reached out, and the illusion of Denny flickered, his expression contorted with fear and uncertainty. Loki's laughter echoed through the storm, sending shivers down the spines of even his most loyal followers. Loki waved his hand again. This time, the illusion showed Selene and Eric. Selene, the fierce archer with magic at her fingertips, and Eric, the stalwart shield-bearer who hid his fear behind bravado. Loki watched them with a calculating gaze, his mind weaving webs of trickery and deceit. "They think their bond makes them strong," Loki mused, his voice dripping with disdain. "But bonds can be broken. Friendships can be twisted, and courage can be turned to despair." He snapped his fingers, and the illusion shifted, showing visions of betrayal, friends turning against one another, and darkness consuming their hope. Loki's gaze hardened as he turned back to the map of the 9 realms. He knew that brute force alone would not defeat Denny and his friends. No, he had to strike where they were weakest, where their fears and doubts could do the work for him. He would turn their hearts against them, and it would be too late by the time they realized what was happening. A new plan began to take shape in Loki's mind, one more devious than the last. The corruption of Yggdrasil was only one piece of the puzzle. His true goal lay more profoundly in the very foundations of the 9 realms, where the threads of fate intertwined with the world tree's roots. If he could gain control of those threads, he would be able to rewrite destiny itself. But first, he needed to test Denny's resilience to see how far he could push the son of Odin before he shattered. Loki raised his arms, calling forth the magic of deception and illusion. Whispers of ancient power flowed around him, and he wove them into curses and spells, each one more insidious than the last. Another figure appeared in a distant part of the storm, a tall, shadowy silhouette cloaked in mist. Hela, the ruler of Helheim and Loki's daughter, emerged from the darkness, her gaze cold and unfeeling. Her presence was as chilling as the grave, and her voice was quiet but filled with authority. "Father," Hela said, her tone laced with curiosity, "you've summoned me." Loki turned to her, his expression softening, though only slightly. "Ah, my dear Hela," he greeted, his voice almost affectionate. "I trust your domain remains secure?" Hela tilted her head, her pale eyes never leaving her father's. "For now," she replied, "but the dead grow restless, and even Helheim has not been untouched by your corruption. What are you planning?" Loki's smile widened. "I am planning a reunion, my dear," he said. one that will shake the very foundations of the realms. But first, I need your help. Hela's eyes narrowed. Why should I aid you? Your schemes rarely benefit anyone but yourself. Loki's smile never wavered. Because this time, dear daughter, it's personal, he said. The son of Odin has interfered, and I will not let a mortal-born half-blood ruin everything I have worked for. His voice turned cold, his eyes flashing with anger. I will tear apart his world, piece by piece, until he begs for mercy. Hela considered this for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Very well, she said. But know this, father, I do not serve you. I will aid you only because it amuses me to watch the realms burn. Loki chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. As long as we understand each other, he said. Now go, spread fear and despair in his heart, and watch his precious courage falter. Hela vanished into the mist, leaving Loki alone with Fenrir. The trickster god's eyes gleamed triumph as he envisioned the chaos that would soon unfold. Denny Wyatt might have thwarted him once, but the games were only beginning. As the storm raged on, Loki whispered a promise to the wind, a promise that carried across the 9 realms. Run as far as you like, son of Odin. Your fate is already sealed. This tale continues next time on Tales from the Shadows, so be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Until next time, stay tuned, stay weird, and watch out for what lurks in the shadows.
This has been Tales from the Shadows, where the shadows speak the stories that will make you weak. Join us on this journey into the unknown. Tales from the shadows, where fear is shown. So subscribe and like, and don't be afraid to dive into the darkness where the shadows are laid.